Welcome to the Midnight Mind. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and give this video a like. I'd really appreciate it. You know what time it is? It's midnight. It's time to enter the mind of Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered how quickly your sense of morality could collapse under pressure? Imagine being handed a uniform and told that you are now a prison guard, and that the men before you were inmates. These men are no different than you. Within hours, you'd notice yourself slipping into a role. Within days, the uniform would feel like a second skin. And within a week, you might be shouting, humiliating, or even assaulting those same men. This is not imagination. It happened in 1971 at Stanford University. Philip Zimbardo's infamous prison experiment began with a simple setup. Volunteers, all young men without criminal records, were randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners. The guards were given mirrored sunglasses, uniforms, and batons. The prisoners were stripped of individuality, given numbers instead of names, and locked in a makeshift cell block in the basement of Stanford's psychology building. It was supposed to last 2 weeks. It ended after 6 days. Why? Because cruelty spread like fire through the system. The guards began inventing punishments. They forced prisoners to do push-ups, clean toilets with their bare hands, endure arbitrary sleep deprivation. Some guards turned sadistic, humiliating the inmates for sport. The prisoners broke down emotionally, some entering states of despair, rage, or numb submission. What shocked the world was not just the brutality, but the speed of the transformation. Good young men, most of them college students, became petty tyrants or broken captives almost overnight. Zimbardo later called this phenomenon the Lucifer Effect, the process by which ordinary people cross the line into cruelty. His conclusion was disturbing, that situational forces, not personal character, were often the decisive factor in whether someone behaved with decency or with malice. It wasn't monsters who committed atrocities. It was regular human beings, transformed by a system that invited their darkest tendencies. Carl Jung, decades earlier, had warned that every human being carries within them a hidden reservoir of darkness. He called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, and exile to the unconscious. Aggression, envy, lust, the hunger for domination. These don't vanish because we push them away. They wait in silence, gathering force, until circumstances give them permission to emerge. The shadow is not evil in itself, but when ignored, it erupts into distorted, destructive ways. In the Stanford basement, the shadow was given a stage. Uniforms stripped away individuality. Sunglasses removed eye contact, turning guards into faceless enforcers. Numbers erased the prisoner's humanity. The environment whispered to the unconscious, here you may play a role. Here you may release what you normally restrain. And once the door opened, the shadow poured out. This experiment was not unique. History is filled with such transformations. Ordinary men in Nazi Germany became concentration camp guards. Neighbors in Rwanda turned on neighbors in the genocide. Soldiers at Abu Ghraib posed with tortured prisoners, smiling as if it were a game. These were not born sadists. They were people swept into systems that rewarded cruelty, disguised responsibility, and silenced conscience. Nietzsche once wrote that whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. But what he did not say, what Zimbardo showed, is that the boundary between man and monster is terrifyingly thin. You don't need years of corruption to cross it. Sometimes it takes only a role, a uniform, and the permission of silence. Pause for a moment and imagine yourself in that prisoner basement. You're given the sunglasses, the baton, the command to maintain order. At first, you resist the urge to act harshly, but then you see another guard mock a prisoner. You laugh nervously, and no one stops him. You notice that when you assert power, your authority grows. When you hesitate, you feel weak. Slowly, the role pulls you deeper. You are no longer John or David or Michael. You are a guard, and the mask is hard to remove. Jung would tell us that what you just imagined is not hypothetical. It's the reality of the human psyche. We like to believe we are rational, moral beings who act from principle. But beneath that thin layer of civility lies the shadow, always watching, always waiting for the moment it can slip through the cracks. The guard roll, the prison walls, the dehumanizing uniforms, these were the cracks that allowed the shadow to flow unrestrained. The lesson of the Lucifer Effect is not that people are secretly evil. It is that people are profoundly malleable. Systems can corrupt faster than individual morality can resist, and once the environment legitimizes cruelty, most will follow. The frightening truth is not that monsters walk among us, it's that the monster can awaken within us when conditions align. When Zimbardo reflected on his experiment, he admitted that even he, as the supervising psychologist, fell into the trap. Instead of stepping back as a scientist, he began to identify as the prison superintendent. He ignored warning signs, allowed the cruelty to escalate, and only stopped when an outsider, his future wife, confronted him with horror at what she saw. Even the man studying the phenomenon was swallowed by it. That is the power of the situation. Jung's framework sharpens this understanding. He would say that Zimbardo's guards were not simply victims of circumstance, they were participants in a psychological ritual, the unleashing of the shadow. A society that denies its inner darkness doesn't eliminate it, it projects it. It acts it out under certain masks, whether uniforms, ideologies, or bureaucratic duties. The shadow, when unacknowledged, seeks expression in the collective. And once it finds a role, it justifies itself with frightening ease. This is why myths across cultures warn of possession, from Greek tragedy to Christian theology, from Norse sagas to Dostoevsky's novels. The theme reoccurs, the man who loses himself to forces greater than him until he becomes a vessel of destruction. The Stanford Prison Experiment was not just a scientific study, it was a modern ritual of possession. Ordinary men were seized by roles that awakened ancient drives: dominance, submission, cruelty, survival, and those drives restructured their entire sense of self. If you take one lesson from this story, let it be this: the line between your civilized self and your shadow is thinner than you think. You carry within you both the capacity for kindness and the potential for cruelty. Most of the time, society rewards the former and suppresses the latter. But change the context, strip away accountability, erase individuality, be surrounded with a system that encourages power, and the shadow is no longer buried. It steps forward, and when it does, you may not recognize yourself. The shadow follows predictable patterns. It is engineered by forces that psychologists and philosophers have long studied: de-individuation, obedience to authority, projection, and the irresistible pull of the herd. Each one is a doorway. Together, they form the path by which good people descend into monstrosity. De-individuation is the first mechanism. It occurs when individual identity dissolves into anonymity. Jung understood that the persona, the social mask we wear, anchors our sense of responsibility. But when that mask is replaced with a uniform, a number, or a role, the individual no longer acts as themselves. They act as the role. In the Stanford experiment, mirrored sunglasses hid the guard's eyes, severing the human link of gaze. The prisoners became numbers, stripped of names. The result was a stage where no one felt accountable. The shadow thrives in this vacuum. You've seen this before. The internet, with its screens and usernames, is a global experiment of de-individuation. People say online what they would never dare to say face to face. The mob piles on, cruelty multiplies, and the individual voice disappears into the swarm. What Zimbardo created in the basement is recreated daily on your phone. Anonymity feeding aggression, role replacing responsibility, humanity slipping into the background. The second mechanism is obedience to authority. Stanley Milgram's shock experiments, conducted a decade before Zimbardo's, revealed how terrifyingly compliant people are. Volunteers, instructed by a calm man in a lab coat, administered what they believed were painful electric shocks to strangers. Most continued to the highest voltage, even as screams rang through the walls. Why? Because the authority figure told them to. The responsibility was displaced. The moral burden was outsourced. Jung warned that the psyche seeks order, and authority provides it. The shadow doesn't need to seize power openly. It waits for authority to give the signal. In Nazi Germany, orders from above became a moral anesthetic. "I was just following orders" is not an excuse invented after the fact. It is the psychological reality in the moment. Authority shrinks personal will until obedience feels not only acceptable, but virtuous. Projection is the third mechanism. Jung described projection as the act of casting one's denied qualities onto others. We see in the enemy the aggression we cannot face in ourselves. In Rwanda, propaganda painted the Tutsi minority as cockroaches, subhuman and parasitic. This imagery allowed neighbors to unleash violence with a sense of righteousness. In the Stanford basement, guards projected weakness, laziness, and defiance onto prisoners. The prisoners became vessels of the guards' disowned fears. And once the projection was in place, cruelty felt justified. This is why regimes always dehumanize their enemies. The enemy is lazy, corrupt, evil, dangerous. Rarely do we admit the enemy is a mirror. The more we deny our shadow, the more we need an external target for it. Once the target is identified, cruelty becomes moral duty. Jung would remind us that the shadow rejected is always the shadow projected. The final mechanism is the herd instinct. Gustave Le Bon, in The Crowd, observed that individuals in a group lose their capacity for independent thought. They merge into a collective mind, driven by emotion rather than reason. Jung agreed, describing the collective as an eruption of archetypal forces. The individual dissolves into the mass, and the shadow finds expression not in one person, but in thousands, chanting, marching, or killing together. The Stanford guards acted crueler in groups than alone. Each guard, seeing others abuse power, felt compelled to match or exceed it. No one wanted to appear weak, and so the cruelty escalated. Not from orders alone, but from the contagious rhythm of the herd. The mob becomes its own authority, demanding conformity through fear of exclusion. If you step back, you see the architecture. De-individuation erases self. Authority replaces judgment. Projection creates an enemy. The herd amplifies it all into a collective storm. When these forces converge, even a gentle soul can become a vessel for cruelty. Zimbardo's Lucifer Effect is not about demons or metaphysical evil. It's about psychological mechanics that, once set in motion, transform the ordinary into the monstrous. But why do these forces hold such power? Jung would say because they resonate with something already inside us. The shadow hungers for release. Authority, anonymity, and the herd provide the excuse it needs. The transformation feels liberating, even exhilarating to those swept up in it. The guard, humiliating his prisoner, is not merely obeying orders. He's tasting the intoxicating freedom of the shadow. Freedom from guilt. Freedom from hesitation. Freedom from the fragile self-image of "I am good." For a moment, he feels powerful, and that sensation is addictive. History confirms this pattern. In the French Revolution, mobs cheered as heads fell into baskets. In Mao's Cultural Revolution, students turned against teachers, humiliating them in public struggle sessions. In each case, the individual believed they were serving justice. In truth, they were surrendering to the same machinery Zimbardo uncovered. Roles, authority, projection, the herd. The shadow was released, clothed in ideology, and celebrated as virtue. Even in everyday life, the seeds are present. Think of workplace hierarchies, where obedience to authority sometimes leads people to betray their values. Think of schoolyard bullying, where the mob gathers to mock one child, each participant feeling less responsible because everyone else joins in. Think of politics, where projection onto the opposing side turns fellow citizens into enemies. The Lucifer Effect is not confined to basements or battlefields. It's woven into daily structures of power. Nietzsche's warning becomes clearer here. The one who fights monsters without self-awareness risks becoming one. But the deeper truth is that the monster is never far away. It waits in the herd, in the authority, in the anonymous mask. It waits in the unconscious, disguised as righteousness. Jung saw this with terrifying clarity. Man doesn't become evil by embracing darkness directly. He becomes evil by believing he has no darkness at all. That illusion makes him defenseless. So, ask yourself, in your life, where do these forces appear? Have you laughed at a cruel joke because everyone else laughed? Have you obeyed a rule that felt wrong simply because someone else in authority insisted? Have you cast blame on others for qualities you secretly dislike in yourself? Each of these is a small rehearsal of the Lucifer Effect. Each is a reminder that transformation doesn't begin in extraordinary circumstances. It begins in the unnoticed choices of ordinary life. Zimbardo's experiment ended after 6 days, but the lesson is eternal. Systems that erase identity, demand obedience, encourage projection, and harness the herd are always waiting. They appear in politics, in corporations, in social movements, and unless you recognize the gears turning, you may find yourself swept into them, participating in cruelty while telling yourself you are simply doing what is expected. The frightening truth is that you are not immune. Neither am I. Neither was Zimbardo himself. And that recognition is the first step toward resistance. Because once you see the machinery, you have a chance, however fragile, to step outside it. If the Lucifer Effect shows us how quickly good men can collapse into cruelty, then the final question is this: how do we resist? How do we keep from becoming instruments of destruction when the system, the role, and the shadow all conspire against us? The answer isn't simple, but the danger is not external alone. It lives within us. To resist is not merely to oppose the system, it's to master oneself. Carl Jung warned that the greatest threat is unconsciousness. The man who believes he is incapable of evil is already halfway corrupted because he has blinded himself to his shadow. The soldier who insists he could never commit cruelty. The citizen who insists he could never be swept up in hatred. The leader who insists their motives are pure. These are the most vulnerable. Their denial leaves them unprepared. Jung's remedy was individuation, the lifelong process of facing the shadow, integrating it, and becoming whole. What does this mean in practice? It means admitting your own capacity for cruelty. It means looking in the mirror and recognizing the parts of yourself you would rather deny. Envy, aggression, lust for power, the temptation to humiliate others. When you acknowledge these forces, they no longer need to erupt unconsciously. The guard in Zimbardo's basement who knew his own hunger for control might have been less likely to abuse it. The one who denied it entirely was the most vulnerable to possession by it. This is the paradox of resistance. You master the shadow not by suppressing it, but by recognizing it. As Jung put it, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The man who integrates his shadow doesn't lose the capacity for cruelty. He gains the ability to choose rather than being chosen by it. The second form of resistance is accountability. Zimbardo's experiment only ended because an outsider, Christina Maslach, walked into the basement and named the horror for what it was. The guards had lost themselves. The prisoners had lost themselves. Even Zimbardo, the scientist, had lost himself. It took the eyes of someone not immersed in the system to break the spell. This reveals the truth. Self-awareness is fragile in isolation. We need others, brave enough to speak truth, to hold us accountable when the system blinds us. History bears this out. In times of mass cruelty, it is often the minority voice, the dissenter, the whistleblower, the one who refuses to obey, that reminds the rest of humanity of what it has forgotten. Socrates in Athens, standing against the tide of opinion. Václav Havel in communist Czechoslovakia, writing of living in truth. Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the gulags, exposing the mechanisms of Soviet terror. Each stood as a witness, and their witness reminded others that conformity was not the only option. But accountability requires courage. To resist the herd is to endure isolation. To defy authority is to risk punishment. To confront the shadow is to risk shattering illusions about yourself. The path to resistance is narrow, and few walk it willingly, which is why systems of cruelty endure as long as they do. Most would rather remain comfortable participants than endure the cost of standing apart. Yet courage is contagious. One dissenter can shatter the illusion of inevitability. In Milgram's shock experiments, when even a single peer refused to continue, compliance dropped dramatically. People need to see resistance modelled before they can imagine it themselves. The herd can corrupt, but it can also inspire. If cruelty is contagious, so is conscience. The third form of resistance is slowing down. Zimbardo's guards escalated cruelty in part because they never paused to reflect. Orders, routines, group pressures all move too quickly for the individual conscience to catch up. Jung would remind us that the unconscious thrives in haste. It slips through when the rational mind has no time to intervene. The antidote is reflection. Silence, delay, questioning. To pause before acting is to interrupt the machinery that drives the Lucifer Effect. You can practice this daily. In the heat of anger, pause. In the pressure of authority, delay obedience. In the noise of the crowd, step aside. These pauses create the space where conscience can re-enter. Without them, the shadow rushes forward unchecked. The fourth form of resistance is testing appearances. Machiavelli warned that men judge more by their eyes than by reality. Zimbardo's experiment proved it again. The uniforms, the sunglasses, the numbers, they were appearances that dictated behaviour. But appearances can be questioned. Does the uniform make the command moral? Does the crowd's passion make the belief true? Does the authority's title guarantee wisdom? The man who resists must train himself to pierce appearances, to look for substance beneath the mask. This requires discipline. Most people surrender to the surface because it's easier. Resistance demands the harder path, to see through the performance and insist on truth. It is an act of inner rebellion, even when no one else notices. Finally, resistance requires what Jung called individuation, the lifelong work of becoming whole. This is not merely self-knowledge. It is the integration of light and dark, of reason and instinct, of individuality and collective responsibility. The individuated person does not deny the shadow. He doesn't project it. He carries it consciously, and in doing so, he denies systems the power to exploit it. Individuation is rare, but it is the only shield strong enough against the Lucifer Effect. The man who knows his own hunger for power cannot be easily corrupted by authority. The man who admits his own capacity for hatred is less likely to project it onto others. The man who sees himself clearly can step into a system designed for blindness and still remember who he is. This is the unsettling truth. You will never eliminate the shadow. You will never be free of the temptation to cruelty. The machinery of roles, authority, projection, and herd instinct will always exist. History guarantees that you will face them in some form. The question isn't whether you are vulnerable. The question is whether you are prepared. Zimbardo ended his book The Lucifer Effect with a call for what he called the heroic imagination, the willingness to see oneself not only as a potential perpetrator of cruelty, but as a potential resistor of it. Jung would agree, though with a darker twist. Heroism begins not in fantasy, but in confrontation with the darkness inside you. The man who denies his shadow cannot be heroic, because he will be possessed by it when the moment comes. The man who integrates his shadow can resist, not because he is pure, but because he is whole. So, when you ask yourself whether you would have been one of Zimbardo's guards, don't comfort yourself with quick denials. Instead, admit the possibility that you could have been. Then, ask the harder question. What would it take for me to resist? That question is the beginning of self-mastery. The Lucifer Effect is not confined to basements, battlefields, or dictatorships. It's in every office where conformity outweighs conscience. It's in every schoolyard where the mob isolates one child. It's in every nation where fear is stoked to justify cruelty. And it is in you, waiting for the conditions to awaken it. To resist is to live in awareness. To resist is to carry your shadow, not deny it. To resist is to pause where others rush, to question where others obey, to stand where others kneel. It will not make you safe. It will not make you comfortable, but it will make you human when others forget what that means. And that is the final lesson of Jung and Zimbardo, that within every one of us lives both the prisoner and the guard, both the victim and the tyrant. The monster is not outside. It waits within. To face it is terrifying. To ignore it is fatal. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button for me. I really would appreciate it. And if you have any thoughts on today's episode, I'd love to hear them. Leave me a message down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.